the two things everybody knows, which is the $10 bill and the fact that he was killed in a duel, are good places to start because his life was an American success story and also a very American tragedy.
Biographer Richard Brookhiser, today on Now I Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. It's the 4th of July, America's 249th birthday. And on this day, we'll look back at the life of one of America's most iconic founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. Now, the smash Broadway play Hamilton brought a newfound resurgence of interest in this most iconic founding father. But 15 years before the play, a book by noted biographer Richard Brookhiser brought Hamilton to life. Brookhiser's 1999 book called Alexander Hamilton American put a fresh perspective and insight to the life of the man who was barely out of his teens on this day in 1776. Now, Hamilton, by his 30s, was America's first Treasury Secretary. And of course, by his 40s, he was shot dead very famously in a duel with Burr. But did you know that Alexander Hamilton was also at the center of America's first major political sex scandal? All this is revealed in Richard Brookhiser's book. In just a moment, our conversation.
This is one of the more than 10,000 interviews that noted radio personality Bill Thompson did over a 30-year span. Sit back and relax, unless you're driving, in which case, keep your eyes on the road.
So here now from 1999, Richard Brookhiser.
I have to tell you, when I first got your book, Alexander Hamilton, I thought, well, yeah, I know about him. And then I tried to think, well, what do I know about him? And I realized, well, he's on the $10 bill, and he's shot in a duel, and the Treasury system. And then I realized, I don't know anything at all about this man. So I guess I fall into that vast majority that you talk about that really don't have much of a clue as to exactly the intricacies, why he is such an important figure in our history.
Well, the two things everybody knows, which is the $10 bill and the fact that he was killed in a duel, are good places to start because his life was an American success story and also a very American tragedy. And so those two factoids encompass both facets of him.
But after 200 plus years have elapsed, we tend to lump all the founding fathers together in one kind of group as though they all thought alike, all act alike, all carried the same views. And it is fascinating to revisit what I visited back in my high school history classes as to the shades of difference, the not just shades of difference, sometimes the vast differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, and then
Well, right. Politics was as partisan in the 1790s as it is in the 1990s, and the lows were as low. I mean, the heights were higher. I think these men were more intelligent than any succeeding generation, but all the vices of partisanship and rancor were present, and there were also serious disagreements about the direction the country should take. And Hamilton became the leader of one of the two emerging parties, Thomas Jefferson the leader of the other.
And here you have a young man who basically steps in and creates the system that we are still operating with today.
He foresaw much more clearly than any of the other founders the economic shape of the country, and also certain aspects of the legal shape that it would take. And they were related in his mind. He thought a flourishing modern economy had to have a rule of law underpinning it. Without it, it was just con games and brigandage, much like the present-day Soviet Union. His vision also included cities. It included manufacturing. There were some cities in America, small by modern standards, almost no manufacturing. He wanted more of both. This was radically opposed to Jefferson, who said that cities contribute no more to the health of a nation than sores do to the health of a body.
This was not just a debate that was easily dismissed then or now.
Well, Alexander Hamilton's ideas about the country were shaped very importantly by his background. He came from the furthest back of any of the founders. He was a true, not a rags to riches story because he never became personally wealthy, but a rags to success and rags to power and prominence story. He was born in the Caribbean. His mother kept a store. His father was an unsuccessful merchant's agent. He was illegitimate. His parents were not married. His father abandoned the family when he was 9. His mother died when he was 11. So he was a poor, illegitimate orphan in a remote part of the world. He got his first break when his employer, a man named Nicholas Kruger, whose family also had a branch in New York, noticed that he was bright and capable and thought to send him to the 13 colonies to get educated. And while he was there, the American Revolution began, and he was deflected into the course that he took. But he was always conscious of the fact that he could very easily have lived in obscurity. He could have stayed put where he was born. He could have made nothing of himself. No one would ever have heard of him. Now, he got out because of his tremendous talents and also because of a lot of luck. But he wanted the United States to be a different kind of a place from the plantation society in which he grew up. He wanted it to be more diverse, more flourishing, with more opportunities, which would develop the diverse talents of the people who lived there. He wanted to improve the odds for future Alexander Hamiltons.
Well, now, was his background the critical difference between him and the Jeffersons and the Burrs and the Madisons?
His background and also his experience on George Washington's staff during the war. He started as an artillery captain at the beginning of the war. He was noticed by senior officers. He became a colonel on Washington's staff, and he stayed there for 4 years. And if you were in that position, you had a catbird seat on the problems of the then existing form of government, because the Army required pay for soldiers, it required supplies, it required food, all of which Congress was chronically unable to supply, both because of its own weakness and because of the economic fragility of the United States at that time.
Well, maybe we need to say just a little bit about what the state of money was at this time in America. People didn't just hand out printed bills with a president's picture on them back then.
Well, that's right. There was printed money by the Continental Congress, which rapidly inflated to worthlessness because they printed too much of it. Most people, if they ever saw money at all, it would be Spanish pieces of 8 or fractions of them cut into halves or quarters. That's why we say 2 bits. That's a bit was 1/8 of a piece of 8. So there was very little circulating capital. There was also not much need for it because most people were farmers. Some of them wealthy. There were planters, but most people were farmers at a subsistence or moderate level. There was some trade in our port cities. Very little manufacturing. So Hamilton wanted to get this country, which had 3 million people, small by European standards, but bigger than where he had come from. He wanted to get this country more active, and he wanted to get it moving.
Given all of that, it's astounding that he was able to foresee, as you said a moment ago, what the future economy of a country like this could eventually grow to become.
Well, the two problems that had to be overcome were the debt that was outstanding from the war. We had a huge burden of debt. Fighting the war was very expensive. We had raised loans in Europe, then we were unable to pay even the interest on the loans. So our credit was essentially non-existent. We also had no power to collect revenues, which would give the government the opportunity to pay off the debt. So the Constitution, and Hamilton attended the Constitutional Convention and argued for the Constitution in the Federalist Papers. That solved the second problem. It did create a federal government which would have the power of levying taxes, not simply asking the states for money, but being able to go to the citizens and tax them on excises, taxes, or to collect tariffs or whatever. But then the second problem then had to be addressed of how to pay off the debt. And what Hamilton did there was he consolidated all the existing debts, both the national debt and the debt of the 13 individual states. He was like one of these ads on TV where, you're bankrupt and so you make one easy monthly payment. He did that. And he also decided that debt holders would be paid at the same rate This was very important, whether they were soldiers or whether they were speculators who had bought debt from original holders. Hamilton decided, and this was politically unpopular, but he said, look, if you want money men to invest in our securities, to invest in our economy, they have to be confident that their investments will be paid off and that these investments can be traded back and forth. And the only way you do that is pay everybody at the same rate. And that's what he did.
After this short break, Richard Brookhiser talks about Alexander Hamilton's sex scandal.
Are you finding this interview engaging? Curious about the book we're discussing?
Simply click the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com, to get your copy.
When you shop through our affiliate links, you're not only enjoying great content, but also supporting this podcast.
Thank you for your support.
Now back to my 1999 conversation with Richard Brookhiser.
Did being politically unpopular bother him?
Well, Hamilton was a very arrogant guy. He was a know-it-all. He thought he, basically knew the answer to any problem that came his way. He would think about it, he would study it, he'd read up on it, and then he'd come to the right conclusion. Some people appreciated this confidence on his part. Other people, it drove crazy. Jefferson among them. On the other hand, he was a very generous know-it-all because he was always willing to explain everything he knew. He would tell you in a 6-hour speech at the Constitutional Convention, in an essay in the newspapers, in 50 essays in the newspapers that ran to 100,000 words altogether. If you wanted to know, he would explain. And he believed that once he'd explained, you would be as smart as he was. There was something very generous about his arrogance.
But now, was there substance to his explanation, or was he just explaining to be long-winded about it?
No, he was always telling you very honestly what his reasons were. There was very little demagogy in this man, and no public deceit. He was always willing to tell you forthrightly what was on his mind.
I have to agree with your observation that the family's favorite portrait of him, it does really look like he's got a little bit of a twinkle in his eye, and like he's just about to say something, as you said, probably something very smart.
That's right. That's right. He was also very honest, about his personal life and his personal problems. He was the center of the first great American sex scandal. Maybe great is the wrong word for it. The first huge American sex scandal. And this was called the Reynolds Affair, and it happened in 2 stages. Stage 1 was when he was Secretary of the Treasury and 3 congressmen came to his office. And they said, there is a man named James Reynolds in jail in Philadelphia, which was then the capital. He is a common crook, but he says he knows you and that you and he have been involved in insider trading together, and you have paid him $1,000 to act as your agent. We're going to tell President Washington. What do you have to say about this? And he said, I do know James Reynolds. I have given him $1,000, but the reason is I've been having an affair with Mrs. Reynolds, and the 2 of them have been blackmailing me. He'd fallen into a honey trap, and he'd had to pay them $1,000. So the congressman said, fine. 5 years later, however, in the newspapers, the first version of this story appears, the corruption story. It had been leaked by one of the congressmen, James Monroe, later president. So Hamilton, in order to defend himself, wrote his own account in the newspapers telling the whole story of the adultery, of the blackmail. He reprinted 20 letters, love letters from her, blackmail letters from him.
In Hamiltonian detail.
In Hamiltonian exhaustive detail. It's the most astonishing confession by any American politician with his tail caught in a crack. And his supporters were humiliated, his enemies were gleeful, but a year after, he got an appointment as second in command of the army when we feared we were going to war with France. So the reward of honesty was that his friends ultimately did not abandon him.
People do forget.
He had his bad moment, and the moment passed. So the rule from that is treat all scandals with honesty up front.
Coming back to, as we talked about at the outset, the other thing that most people are familiar with, the life of Alexander Hamilton, is the way his life ended. What was the reason behind the duel in the first place?
Well, dueling was fairly common then. There'd been a lot of duels in the officer corps during the war, and they continued after the war. And it was a thing gentlemen did. It was against the law. Deaths and duels were legally considered murders, but they were hardly ever prosecuted because no jury would convict. Just jury nullification. This is what gentlemen did. So, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr had known each other for many years. They both lived in New York. They were both New York lawyers. They would argue cases against each other or together for the same client. It was a very small world. They got along fine socially. But not only did Burr belong to the opposite political party, but Hamilton also distrusted him as a man. It went beyond disagreement. He disagreed with Thomas Jefferson, but he knew where Jefferson was coming from, and he always trusted him to do what he said. It would be the wrong thing, but you could trust Jefferson. You knew Jefferson was predictable. Burr was not. So Hamilton always opposed Burr's efforts to get elected to office. This had been going on for years. Finally, Burr was vice president, but his term was ending. He was not going to be renominated. He was casting about for an office. He thought to run for governor of New York. Once again, Hamilton opposes him. Burr's had enough, challenges him to a duel. They went to Weehawken, which is on the Hudson River, the New Jersey side of the Hudson River, where New Yorkers went to duel in those days. And Hamilton had told a friend of his, and he'd written in a letter to his wife, that he had moral scruples against taking a man's life in a duel, and therefore he would withhold his first shot. But Aaron Burr did not have such scruples, so Hamilton was shot. It took him 36 hours to die at the age of 47.
You know, at one point in your book, you said that as valuable a role as Alexander Hamilton played in straightening out their nation's finances, I think you deliciously put it, nobody loves their accountant. Is his place on the $10 bill not Mount Rushmore, as you also put it?
Well, let's think of what we might have become had he not been there. Very few Americans understood finance. He was one of the few. We look around the world today at new countries, and we call most of them third world countries, and we have very contemptuous attitudes towards them, and they seem chaotic and poor, and if we don't think it's because of our oppression, we think it's because of their own fault. And the United States could have taken that route. It was very heavily in debt. Many American politicians had no clue how to solve this problem. Hamilton did. He put us on the course to prosperity and security and stability. And if you go now to Weehawken, where he fought his duel with Burr, there's a little pillar with his bust and a flagpole. Not much to see there. But if you look across the Hudson, you see the skyline of Manhattan. And if Hamilton were brought back and could see it, he would say, this is what I wanted. This is what I came here for. This is what I worked to build.
Now you can get your copy of Alexander Hamilton American by Richard Brookhiser by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 2012 conversation with commentator and historian Kevin Phillips.
People have a very limited view of a lot of events because they think it all started in 1776. When you know it started 2 years earlier, you pay attention to a whole depth of what went into it and how long it took and what accomplished what.
And my 1998 talk with noted historian Eric Foner.
Our feeling that we are the preeminent exemplars of freedom comes from the American Revolution, which created a nation which declared itself to be an asylum for liberty for the whole of mankind.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, my conversation from years ago with the author of one of the most iconic books of our time, my 1987 conversation with the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams.
One day I was going to write a detective story, then I thought, no, actually what I want to do is write a ghost story. Then I thought, no, actually what I want to write is a computer thriller. And at the end I thought, well, I'll put it all together and write, yes, it's a ghost horror detective whodunit time travel romantic musical comedy epic.
That's next time. Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.